All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Menachem Av, the Tilson and Wohl families of Eretz YIsrael, sending their love from Eretz YIsrael and wishing us the Meretz Hashem to be able to join them, have the schus to join them, Meretz Hashem b'sha'a tova u'metzlachas. And of course, as always, we dedicate our learning in the schus of our precious hostages to Meichadesh Baruch Hu, bring them back to their families b'shalom and b'karov, and in the schus of our precious soldiers, may they be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Really incredible daf ahead of us. Today's daf is Nun Hey 55, and we are picking up for a change on 55 Nun Hey Amud Aleph, and we are picking up Meretz Hashem 2, 4, 5 lines down from the top. Shalach Rav Huna bar Avin. So remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit, we are dealing with a fascinating statement of Shmuel, where Shmuel says that there is this exploitable legal window, right? Exploitable legal window in which the following could occur. I am purchasing a piece of parcel of land from an akum, from a non-Jew. So again, the halacha l'maisa, again, I go ahead and I give the money to the non-Jew, but I have yet to receive my shtar. Now remember again, the mechanics of the transaction over here are incredibly important, because at the time that the akum receives his money, essentially from his perspective, he's done. He's done. He's received his consideration. He's received his money. His side of the transaction is that, which means he relinquishes any and all ownership to the piece of land. The Jew, however, really only acquires the land when he goes ahead and he gets the shtar. Because remember again, that shtar is the only indicator that he is the owner of this property. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, you have this interesting dynamic by which again you have that moment in which the Jew does not yet own the property, but yet the non-Jew has already removed himself from the property. So therefore Shmuel said, halacha l'maisa, if someone else were to swoop in, if another Jew were to swoop in, and to go ahead and take possession of that property during that window, technically speaking, it could work. Technically speaking, it could work. So the Gemara says, Shalach Rav Huna bar Avin. He saw Shalakach Sadam Ovei Kochavim. So therefore, Rav Huna bar Avin is coming along and saying as follows: if Yisrael purchases a field from an akum, and another Jew comes along and acquires it. Now remember again, acquires it in that window where after the Jew has given the non-Jew money, therefore the akum is out. Right? He's out. He has no ownership. But before the Jew has received his shtar, therefore, again, the Jew has not yet taken on ownership. Another Jew comes along and takes possession of it. Now, we'll say, now, again, how could another Jew come along and take possession of it? Because essentially, in that exploitable window, the field itself is hefker. The field itself does not have a defined owner. There's an ownership void. So therefore, again, Jew number 2 takes advantage of the ownership void, swoops in, takes the field for himself. What is the halacha? Ein motzin osa miyado. We do not extract the field from Jew number 2. He has exploited this legal window again. Obviously, we're not encouraging this. Obviously, we don't look favorably upon this, but technically speaking, it works, and Jew number 2 becomes the owner of the field. Rabbi Avin, Rabbi Loi, V'chol Rabbasinu Shavin B'davar. And ultimately, again, all the rabbis were in agreement. We're in agreement about this particular issue. So that brings to a close this sugya. So now, of course, what do we do with this? In other words, this is it. I understand the mechanics of it. In other words, the mechanics, we spent, this was most of yesterday's daf we spent on this. It was all of Amud Beis. I understand the mechanics of it, but l'maisa, how does this work? So I'll share with you of something very interesting. So the Rambam, in Hilchos Zechiyah Umatana, Haparak Aleph Halacha Yedalid, quotes this halacha, but adds in one fascinating piece of information that seems to allow all of this to actually come together. So the Rambam writes as follows: Akum shemachar metaltlin liYisrael, o kana metaltlin liYisrael. Right? So an akum is going out. Let's just keep the case the same. Right? It's our case. An akum, non-Jew, is selling a parcel of land to a Jew. So what happens? The Jew pays the money. So now the Rambam writes. So remember. So the akum is finished as soon as he goes ahead and receives his money. However, again, the Jew does not really take title until he receives the shtar. Therefore, again, What happens over here? The kodem sheyachzik ba yisrael achar vehechzik ba keder shemachziki b'nichse hager. So now let's our exact case. So I'm going ahead and I'm purchasing a field from a non-Jew. I give him the money. So now non-Jew is out. I haven't received my shtar, so therefore again my ownership interest has not vested. Now another Jew comes along. We'll call him Reuven. Comes along and takes possession of this field, as one would take possession of an ownerless field. What is the halacha? What is halacha? Zocha achron. Reuven acquires it. Now that I'm listening to this phrase, v'nosein l'rishon es hadamim. Reuven acquires it. But what is Reuven obligated to do? What is he obligated to do? He's obligated to go ahead and pay for it. In other words, that halacha l'maisa, you're right, Reuven exploited a legal loophole. But what is Reuven obligated to do? Reuven is obligated to pay me for it. In other words, that l'maisa again. So now this picture makes a lot more sense over here. In other words, that Reuven is exploiting a legal loophole by which there is this moment in time where this field has no, quote unquote, no owner. And this David Shores brought this up yesterday's daf. But there is a recognition. I paid $10,000 to Akum for this field. So while it's true that he swooped in there in this legal loophole, right, and halacha l'maisa got the field, he has to pay me the money. In other words, he took something that I paid for. Granted, he got it in a moment of ownerlessness. But l'maisa, he has to pay me. Okay, so now he's able to exploit the legal loophole, but he still has to make me financially whole by paying me the $10,000 that I paid to Akum. And that's in Shalom HaYisrael. At that point in time, then it becomes the true owner. Very interesting. Okay. Again, there's more to the legalese of that particular case, but for us, that's going to do it. So let's go back there. We'll say some interesting words over here. Amar Rabba. Rabba said as follows. Hani tlas mili. We'll say first wide line, 55. Einun hemad aleph. Hani tlas mili ishtay li ukvan bar Nechemia reish galusa mishmei d'shmuel. So listen to this. So Rabba said as follows. These three things, Ukvan bar Nechemia, who was the reish galusa, told me in the name of Shmuel. Three halachas. Halacha number one, Dina d'malchusa Dina. The law of the land is the law of the land. So also we saw this already in yesterday's daf. One must follow now, again, Dina d'malchusa Dina also presupposes that the government is a just government. So we'll say in past, and in times when we were living in the diaspora and other tekufas, other times in which, and we were living under tyrannical governments. So Dina d'malchusa Dina only applies to what we call, quote unquote, a just government. But Chas V'Shalom, a tyrannical government, a despotic government, Dina d'malchusa doesn't necessarily apply. Okay, so in any event, so Dina d'malchusa Dina. The laws of the land are the laws of the land. So even if halacha says one thing, again I will say, obviously, we would not necessarily follow the laws of the land if they were to be in contradiction of halacha, but very often Dina d'malchusa Dina said, even though halacha may allow you to do one thing, if the law of the land tells you you can't do it, you have to follow the law of the land. Dina d'malchusa Dina. Number one, next. Arisusa de Parsoya I mentioned. So the Rashbam has two gears, so this will just go with the simpler one. In Persia, the halacha was that chazaka was only established after 40 years. So again, this is actually quite interesting, that even though from our perspective, chazaka is established after 3 years, according to Persian law, 40 years. So I just want to point out, the first two kind of go together. In other words, why? So therefore the Gemara is saying is, if you're in Persia, you follow the law of the Persian land. So chazaka will be established after 40 years. And number three, V'hani zaharuri dezabin areletaska zabninhu zabnini. This is very interesting, I will say. So these zaharuri, so Rashi points out over, the Rashbam points out over here, that zaharuri refer to people who inherit a lot of money. So wealthy individuals. So these wealthy individuals who go ahead and purchase land from the monarchy by paying off the property taxes become the owner of that land. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. It's the first line of the Rashbam. Zabninu zabnini, mashekonina karka me'avde hamelach b'shil hamas shenosnin machran kayim. The dina d'malchusa Dina. So we'll say, so again, all three of these things are kind of interrelated. So here's what would happen. If you don't pay your property taxes, what does the king do? What does the government do? They take your land. And who do they give the land to? Whoever is willing to come along and pay off the property tax, the outstanding property tax debt, ultimately becomes the owner of the property. Okay? Now, watch this. There's an interesting kind of knetch in this, which is, so let's say Reuven has property. Reuven failed to pay his property taxes. The government seizes his property. I come to the king, right, to the government. I pay off this $10,000 in property taxes. I pay off the $10,000. I become the owner. Now what happens? A week later, Reuven comes to me. Reuven says, thank you so much. I was able to accumulate the money. Here's my back taxes. He's obviously not going to pay it to the king because I already paid it. He's willing to repay me, or he wants to repay me and take his property back. The halacha is, I am not obligated to give that property back to him. In other words, I can, if I want to be a nice guy, I absolutely can, but I'm not obligated to do so. If I want to retain the field, that's the Rashbam says over here. The Rashbam says, the dina de malchus adina, second wide line, v'im yachziru bailim mishonim, o yis'ashru v'yomer lahachzir hamas, lahani zaharuri, lo yuchlu la'arer al hani zaharurei klal, dezagninu zibini. See, even if the original owner runs into some money, and now he is able to go ahead and pay off the property tax, or pay me back the property taxes that I paid, I am not obligated to pay him back. I'm not obligated to restore the land to him. Again, if I want to, I certainly can, but I'm not obligated to do so. Okay, so we'll say, so these are the three halachas that they said over in the name of Shmuel. Number one, dealing with the malchusa, dealing with the law of land, the law of the land. Number two, in Persia, the law of chazak was only established after 40 years. And number three, in a place where the king seizes property because of outstanding property tax, and you pay back the property tax, you, the payer, become the owner of the property. And even if the original owner runs into some money afterwards and wants to pay you to get his land back, if you want to, you could give it back to him, but you're not obligated to do so. Incredible. So the Gemara gives, so also we're going to focus a little bit on that last halacha. V'hani mili l'taska aval kargolo. Now we'll say this when does this last halacha work? Only if the property tax was seized, only if the property was seized because of property taxes, but not because of head tax. Two different taxes, okay? We write two different taxes. There's a property tax and there's a head tax. So if the king seized someone's property because of outstanding property taxes, let's say the king seized Reuven's property, and then Shimon comes along and pays off the outstanding property tax, so Shimon becomes the owner. What if the king seized Reuven's property because Reuven had outstanding head tax, and now Shimon comes along and pays off that head tax and gets the property? Shimon does not become the owner of the property. Why not? Because they'll say, you don't normally seize property because of a head tax. Why not? The Gemara says, my taima, karga akarkov te gavri manach. Because it was in general, a head tax was like an obligation upon the individual, not an obligation that vested itself on a person's property. So in other words, property tax obviously creates a lien against property. Head tax creates a lien on the individual, does not create a lien against his property. So therefore, any seizure of property for outstanding head tax is a personal tax, is an inappropriate or illegal seizure. And therefore, someone who gains property through outstanding head does not become the owner. Outstanding property taxes, property seizure is absolutely normal. Very interesting. Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yoshua, says, no. Afilu sari dekado mishtadi lekarga. See, says it's actually not true. When it comes to your head tax, your personal taxes, everything is encumbered to your head by your head tax. Right? Literally translated, even the barley in the jug. See, even the barley in the jug kind of like even means like what you have in your lunchbox. Even what you have in your lunchbox is meshubad, is ultimately encumbered by your head tax. Alachas kama v'kama, all the more so even your property. Incredible. Okay, so we'll say, so just interesting, this is just a machlokes like in mechanics over here, in terms of how much of or what of your property is or isn't encumbered by the king's head tax. Amar Rav Ashi, Amar Huna Bar Nasan, Kashi Ba'amemar, Imkain, Bitalta Yerushas Beno HaBechar, Dahavile Roy, Vein HaBechar Nota Beroy Kibamochsach. So we'll say, this is fascinating. Okay. we need a little bit of introduction. We'll say that today's daf is one of those dafim where there is just a tremendous amount of information from all different corners being thrown at us over here. Right? So watch this. There's halacha that says that a firstborn son, gets pishnayim, gets a double portion. That's a biblical law. Okay. So I'll say, what does a bachar get a double portion in? So the halacha is, and I'm telling you the Rashbam outside, the bachar gets a double portion in what we call muhzak, in that which the father owns at the time of his death, and not in ra'oi, not in what the father is entitled to at time of death. So for example, on a simple idea. So right, Yaakov has a son. Yaakov has two sons, right? Three sons. Making a good day, right? Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. He's got three sons. So now what happens? Reuven is the bachar. Reuven is the firstborn. When Yaakov dies, Reuven gets a double portion. So let's say Yaakov, at the time that he dies, has $1 million in his estate. So Reuven's going to get double portion. However we're calculating double portion, pishnayim. Let's say also, in addition to the $1 million, I literally meaning he has $1 million cash in his bank account. So Reuven's going to get pishnayim. Let's say in addition to that, Reuven has loans that he made. So there's outstanding debts that are payable to the estate. But those debts are actually not due for another year. So we'll say, so those outstanding debts, Reuven does not get pishnayim. What's the difference? The $1 million that Yaakov has in his estate, that's muhzak. Yaakov has it. He possesses it. The din of pishnayim, double portion of the firstborn son, is in muhzak. The stuff that's due to the estate, that's called roi. That's called entitled. Entitled, a bachar does not get pishnayim in what he's entitled to. So now, watch this. So the Gemara is making the following suggestion. If you tell me that essentially a person's entire estate, all of my property, is encumbered to all of my taxes, right? To my head tax. Now, because so not only is my property encumbered by my property taxes, the Gemara wants to suggest, at least according to Rav Huna bar Yoshua, but even my personal tax, even my head tax, ultimately encumbers all of my property. So I will say, watch this. If that's the case, then let's say Yaakov dies. And let's say Yaakov dies and he has not yet paid his taxes. Not even necessarily that he's in arrears, right? But he died before he was supposed to pay his taxes. That means what? His entire estate is encumbered by the king. If his entire estate is encumbered by the king, then he's not muhzak. Then he's not the true possessor of it. Rather, it's only right. It's called an entitlement. If that's the case, then there's never going to be a situation of where a bachar gets pishnayim double portion from his father's estate, because all property prior to the paying of taxes is called roi, is called entitled, as opposed to muhzak, as opposed to actually vested. Such a fascinating question. So the Gemara says, Amarlei ihachi afilu taskanami. So the truth is, this is not just the kasha and Rav Huna bar Yoshua, if you hold that property is encumbered by head tax, but this is also a shayla in property taxes. In other words, okay, even if you don't accept Rav Huna bar Yoshua, who says that head tax creates an encumbrance on all your property, so even if you just go with property taxes, right? If Yaakov dies before he paid his property taxes, that means his property is encumbered by the king, in which case his son should not get pishnayim in property because it's roi, not muhzak. So what do you have to say? Do you have taska umis? Hachanami do you have karga umis? So Rabbi said, this is very interesting. So you have to set it up as a case where what? Where Yaakov, you're right, in order for a bachar to get pishnayim in his father's entire estate, what has to happen? His father has to have paid off his taxes before he went ahead and he died. But in Achinami, if the father died, right, if Father Yaakov died before he paid off his taxes, whether it's property according to everyone, or even personal tax, according to Rav Huna bar Yoshua, in Achinami, the entire estate is encumbered. Therefore, the estate has the status of ra'ui, of something that is entitled but not vested, and therefore the bachar will not get pishnayim. So I'll say, so again, don't glean actual inheritance law from this, because remember, again, this halacha l'maisa is also reflective of a particular societal norm, but just a fascinating idea. Okay, so I'll say, so again, Actually, let's finish this up. Amr Rashi. Rashi said as follows. He said, Amr li Huna bar Nosan. Huna bar Nosan said to me the following: Shaltino l'sifrei de Rava. I went and I asked the scribes of Rava, va'amru li hilchasa ki Rav Huna breit Rav Yoshua. And the scribes of Rava told me that the halacha follows Rav Huna breit Rav Yoshua. What does Rav Huna breit Rav Yoshua hold? He holds that property is encumbered even to head tax, right? That ultimately, again, if you have not yet paid your head tax, that creates an encumbrance upon all property as well. It's not just property taxes that creates a lien against real property, but it's personal tax, head tax, that creates a lien against real property as well. So the Gemara says, Alohi. Now the Gemara says, don't pay attention to that. Why not? Hasam lo ukme milsahu da amar. They're only trying to justify their own practices. Now, what does that mean? So the Rashbam points out over here. If you look at the Rashbam, velo hi hasam, it's kind of like right smack in the middle of the wide lines. Les hilchos hakrafuna Yeshua to lo mishtabdi lo karkos velo matalton lekargo. So in reality, the halacha does not follow Rav Huna Rav Yoshua. The Gemara suggests that ultimately, again, when it comes to head tax does not create an encumbrance on any property. Any property. Head tax is only an encumbrance against, or I should say, create a lien against the individual. V'zabin lekarga lo have zabninhu zivini the karga karkafta the gavra manach v'inu safri the rava the armi hilchas akrafuna lokmi milsayu boy lekayim asem ushtaros shekasvu amachiros karkol shenmikro karga. So let's listen to this. So apparently, the scribes of Rava, they used to write up documents for these type of transactions all the time. So in order to go ahead and bolster the validity of the documents they were writing, they said that the halacha follows Rav Huna breit Rav Yoshua. But in fact, it does not. Okay, so I will say, let's just to frame this over here. So remember, just how did we get here? In the name of Shmuel, they said over 3 halachas. Halacha number 1, dina damachus adina, law of land. Now, halacha number 2, in Persian law, chazaka is after 40 years. And halacha number 3, what was halacha number 3? Yeah, that if you go ahead and if there was land seized by the king because of failure to pay property taxes, and you pay off the tax lien to the king, you become the owner of the property. Those are 3 halachas. Now, I will say that interestingly enough, the Gemara suggests that's only if you paid off the property taxes. But this halacha does not apply to personal taxes, meaning property is not seized for delinquent personal head tax. And if property is seized, that is an illegal seizure, and therefore if you pay off that tax, that you do not become the owner. Rav Huna breit Rav Yoshua says, yes, you do. Property seizures for delinquent head taxes is a proper seizure. So essentially what they have over here is just a machlokas about how the head tax works. That's it. It's a machlokas in metzias, it's a machlokas just in historical reality. Was property seized for delinquent head tax or not? Machlokas. Good, that's all. And I will say just along this journey, we picked up another fascinating halacha, which is in the laws of inheritance. Right, number 1, firstborn, Bachar, gets Pishnayim, double portion. But what does he get double portion in? What does he get double portion in? He gets double portion is what we call in muchzak. Muchzak is what the estate actively owns at the time of death of the patriarch, of the father. But let's say the estate is owed certain things, we call that Roi. The Bechar, the firstborn, does not get Pishnayim in that. Okay, incredible. Let's go weiter. We'll say another very interesting halacha. Amar Ravashi. We'll say 4 lines up from the bottom. Amar Ravashi. Pardachas Misayeya Masa. A pardachas has to help out in the tax burden of the city. Now, what's a pardachas? So the Rashbam says over here, Adam batal mimalacha. This is a guy who does not work, right? Umi limud. He also does not learn. Umi derech eretz. And he actually does nothing. He does nothing. Okay? So there's a person who's just idle. Idle, does absolutely nothing. Right? Ve'ina osek b'yeshuvo shel olam klal. he does absolutely nothing productive. Right? So he's not working, he's not learning, he's not contributing, he does not do anything to make any kind of active contribution to the city at all. But what's the halacha? The Rashman says, Misayeh Masa, Hu Chayiv Ba'ol Hakal. He still is responsible to share in the tax burden of the community, even though he doesn't do anything, right? So he's not earning money, he's not generating profit, he's not doing anything, but even though he's idle, he's still obligated to share in the tax burden of the city. In other words, we'll say, what the Gemara is just highlighting over here is, if you live in the city, you're obligated to pay your way, you're obligated to pay your fair share. And even if halacha l'maisa, you are not doing anything, right? You're not contributing in any of us. So you have to understand something, right? Remember from our brachas days. How many years are we into this cycle already? 5 years? No. Year 6 in January. Okay, wow. Okay, so let's remember again our brachas days, right? The Gemara says that there was this thing called Asara Batlanim. Right? What were the Asara Batlanim? It's not like it sounds like 10 people who do nothing. You're like, hey, I know those guys. Right? No, it was like Asara Batlanim were the 10 people whose job it was to make sure that there was always a minyan in the shul. They're like the community kolo. Everybody has a role and everybody has a place, as long as everybody has a defined communal contribution. So the issue over here is this guy is doing nothing. He's not doing anything. See, he might not be doing anything, but Allah L'maiseh still has to share in the tax burden of the city. Now, both say that's very interesting. Now, both say, now, what would generally happen over here? So remember again, the king would come, or the king's emissaries would come to collect taxes. So they would go ahead, and there would be a certain amount that would be levied upon the townspeople. So there's a collective amount, and everybody has to pay their share. So now both say, so if halacha l'maaseh, the king's men come to collect, or the government tax collectors come to collect the tax, and the townspeople tell the collector, listen, that guy, we'll just call him Ruvain, that guy, there's no point in collecting anything from him because you're not going to get anything from him. So in that case, where the townspeople negotiated that he should essentially be left alone, so they kind of got him out of the king's collectors, or the government's collectors, he still has to pay his fair share to the townspeople. In other words, he's got to find a way to make up his amount. However, aval, in diski, siyaita dishmayu. They'll say, what happens if just the way it worked is the government collector just skipped over him. They just skipped over him. In other words, they just never knocked on his door. For whatever cheshbon they had, they just never knocked on his door. So I will say, so in that case, we consider that siyata d'shmaya. That's divine providence. And halacha l'maisa, this guy, the bardachta, he does not have to pay anything. So you see the distinction? In other words, I will say, if the townspeople negotiated on his behalf that the government should leave him alone, so then Allah might say he still owes his portion to the townspeople, because you got to remember, if he doesn't pay, they're going to have to pay more. However, again, if the collector just of their own volition left this pardachta alone, we consider that siyata d'shmaya, that's divine providence, and he does not have to pay at all, even though his failure to pay is going to create a heightened financial liability upon everyone else. Okay, incredible. I'll just mention over here, I think that there may be another way to read that line as well. I was very struck by this. Amar Vashi, pardachta misayeh masa. So the way we translated it is that even the pardachta, which is the guy who doesn't do anything, has to help out in the burden, the tax burden of the city. Perhaps it could also be read as pardachta misayeh masa, meaning even the guy who you think does nothing, misayeh masa, is helping the community in some way that you don't know. I was about to say, sometimes we look at people and we are, whether we like to admit it or not, we are all exceptionally judgmental. And generally we size people up and we judge people within the first few moments in which we see how they physically present, how they dress, how they act, how they talk, how they conduct themselves. And often we kind of come to the conclusion that certain people are contributors and certain people aren't contributors. Certain people make a meaningful contribution to the community and others do not. The Gemara says, pardachta, even that guy who you think is doing nothing, misayeh masa, is in some way contributing to the continuity of Klal Yisrael. This is reminiscent ultimately of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, where the Mishnah says, Al tivaz l'chol adam. Do not be dismissive of any person. She'in l'cha adam she'in lo zman. Right? Ein l'cha adam she'in lo makom. Right? Every person has his moment. Every person has his place. There is no such thing as a person who doesn't make his contribution to the klal in some way. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't see it, but it's always there. Never be dismissive of another Jew, because some way, somehow, everybody makes their own contribution to the national fabric. And if you can begin to appreciate this is the secret to Achdos. It's the secret to Avas Chinam. Just because you can't see what someone's contribution is, or you can't see how someone's being productive, or you can't see what someone is contributing, doesn't mean that it's not happening. That's what Rashi is saying. Pardachta misayeya masa. Every Yid makes a contribution. Every Jew somehow adds his or her piece to the communal fabric. Whether you see it or not is absolutely irrelevant. It happens. And therefore be so careful how you treat every single Jew, because everyone is making their contribution to the greatness of our people in some way, shape, or form. Such an incredible Gemara. Let's go weiter. So this is actually a very interesting Gemara. So Meitzar means a boundary marker, and Chatzav, the Rashbam says over here, is Chatzav hu ilan o esev shebo chitem Yoshua's Eretz YIsrael. So we'll say, so this is actually interesting. So boundary marker, we understand, right? Boundary marker, Chatzav was a type of plant. Now, what was unique about the Chatzav plant? This is very interesting. Rashi says, the Rashbam says over here, when Yoshua led a Klal Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael, so they had 14 years, right? 7 years of kibush, 7 years of conquering the land, and 7 years of chiluk, of dividing the land. How did they divide up the land? So apparently they planted this plant called the Chatzav plant as a boundary marker. Now, what's unique about the Chatzav plant? This is incredible. The roots of the Chatzav plant only grow down, do not grow sideways. So that it's not yonik, it doesn't derive its nourishment, from multiple fields, only straight down. So we'll say, therefore the Gemara says as follows: a meitzar, a boundary marker, and a chatzav, and the chatzav plant, mafsikim b'nichsi hager. They go ahead and they divide up parcels by nichsi hager. Now what does this mean? Let's say again, we'll call the guy Ruvain the ger. So Ruvain the ger dies. He dies. He does not leave behind any heirs. He leaves behind 2 parcels of land. Now the parcels themselves are divided, right? By a chatzav plant, by a boundary marker, whatever it is, they're divided. So now we'll say, what's the halacha? What happens to nichse hager? What happens to the property of a ger who dies without heirs? What happens? Hefker. So now I want to come and acquire it. So I go to field A and I shovel, right? So that's considered to be a chazaka. When there's a boundary marker, so my act of chazaka only works on what? That one field, right? That one field. So again, because since there's a boundary marker, again, they're separate and distinct. So that's the Gemara says over here, that meitzar and chatzav mafsigim minech sager, aval inyan peya v'tuma lo. When it comes to peya means the obligation to leave a corner of the field. Tuma, as we'll discuss in just a moment, it does not go ahead and make a distinction. Ki asa Rabbi Yochanan afilu lepeya tuma. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Even for peya and for tuma, boundary markers and the chatzav plant divided into 2 fields. What are these cases? Peya mai. Gemara wants to say, what's the case of peya and tuma? It's very interesting. Peya mai, mahi disnan ve'elu mafsikin lepeya. So I'll say, so remember again, what's the halacha by peya? The halacha by peya says like this: if I have a field, I have an obligation to leave a corner of that field for the poor. What's the shear of peah? What's the shear of peah? We say it every single morning, right? In Berachas HaTorah, that peah is one of those things that doesn't have a shear. You leave a lot, you leave a little, that's up to you. You can leave as much as you want, but you just have an obligation to leave a corner of your field. Now, the obligation of peah is upon every distinct field that you possess. So the Gemara says there are certain things which by definition divide a field into 2 for peah purposes. The following things create or divide a field for peah purposes. What are they? Hanachal, which is a river or a stream. Hashalulis, a ditch of water, a big ditch of water. On the base, the derech harabim, or a path, right? A path, or I should say it's not really a path, a road that is used by the public. Derech hayochid, or for that matter, again, a road that is used by an individual. Ushvil harabim, or a path that's used by the public. Ushvil hayochid hakavua, baby mosacham ben mosachishamim, or a path that is used by an individual during the rainy season and during the summer. And I will say, just to point out over here, what's the difference between, a derech and a shvil? So the Rashbam points out over here that a derech is a real road. The Rashbam says, Tes Zayin Amma Rochav. It's a road that is 16 amos wide. Now what that means is that is big enough for wagon traffic. As opposed to a shvil, a path which is only made for pedestrian traffic. So the idea over here is, we'll say, so this is very intuitive. If I have a field, and there is a path that runs through it, individual path, public path, or there's a road, individual or public road. What that does is that road bisects the field and makes the field into two separate fields for pay purposes, which means I have to leave a separate corner of those two sides of the field. So in other words, the field on each side of the road, even though, again, we'll call it from a title perspective, this is one field, but the presence of that road, or the presence of the path, or the presence of the stream, or the presence of the big ditch, ultimately makes the field into two, to the point that I have to leave a different corner on each of those sides of the field. So we'll say, so just to pause here just a second. Therefore, again, what Rabbin is saying in Rabbi Yochanan is that not only that, but even if you have, even if you have boundary markers along the middle of a field, or a chatzav plant planted down the middle of a field, that also makes it into a separate field for payah purposes. You'd have to leave two corners. We'll say, obviously, that makes a distinction, because the need to go ahead and leave two corners obviously represents a bigger tzedakah investment than leaving one corner. Okay, what's the case of Tumah? So this is actually very interesting. The Tumah Mahi, what's the case of Tumah? This now, listen to this. Hanichnas lebika b'imos hagishamim. Person enters into a plain. Bika means a plain, right? Which means a large expanse of fields. Person enters into the plain during the rainy season. Now, what's the chap of the rainy season? So the Rashbam points out over here that during the rainy season, people do not walk on fields. Why not? Because remember again, fields are planted, right? The beginning of right before the rainy season, beginning of the rainy season. Obviously, during the rainy season, that's when the fields are going to grow. So generally, you don't have pedestrian traffic on fields during the rainy season, because that would ruin the crops. Now, why is this important? Because we're both saying that makes fields, listen to this, fields during the rainy season are considered to be a reshus hayochid, a private domain. Okay. Now, as opposed to, let's say, during the summer, because again, remember, at that point, I'm nothing really, they were harvested already, and most what you have is crops, harvested, drying in the field, which tells you that during the summer season, fields are often considered to be reshus harabim. Now, who cares? It makes a big difference. Why? Because before we get into this case, what's the halacha? The halacha is, if you have a case of safek tumah, I'm not sure, did I come in contact with tumah or not? So both say, where the safek occurred makes a tremendous difference in the resolution of the doubt. Safek tumah bershus hayochid is sveiko tameh. We deal with that stringently, and the safek will be tameh. Safek tumah bershus harabim is dealt with as lekula, leniently. Okay, now watch this. Now again, we actually remember again. What's the source? The source of that is sota. That's where the source of that comes from. But again, not for now. So the Gemara says as follows. So tumamai. Here we go. Disnan. Hanichnas lebika b'imos hagishamim. If a person goes into a field during the rainy season. So again, now remember again what's happened over here. So rainy season, the field is reshus hayochid. And now what happens? V'tumah b'sada plonis. Now the case over here is this is a bika. A bika is a plain where there's a lot of fields, right? All separate fields, a lot of fields. So what happens? I go into the plain during the rainy season. Now here's what I know. There is tumah in a particular field, b'sa plonis, in a particular field. Va'amar, and I say, halachti lemakom halaz, ve'ini yodea im nichnasti la'osa makom ve'im lav. So I say, so now I say like this. I walk into the plane during the rainy season. So now I say to myself, okay, I know I went into the plane. What don't I know? I don't know if I went into the field that has the tumah. So let's say, for example, let's call it field A. Field A is the one that has the tumah. So I know that I entered into the plane. I don't know, did I enter into field A or not? So I will say, what's the halacha? Rabbi Lazar Mitzayir. Rabbi Lazar says you're tar. Now, this is actually fascinating. Why does Rabbi Lazar say you're tar? Why? You want to get ready for this? It's a svek. So, by the way, this is a ridiculously exciting daf. There's so much in this. Right? This is what's called a svek sveka. What's a svek sveka? Double suffix. What's the double suffix over here? Suffix number one is, did I enter into field A? Right? And what's suffix number two? Even if I entered into field A, did I come in contact with the tumah in field A? So it's a double suffix. Did I enter into the field where there is the tumah? And even if I entered into, again, I will say, remember again, when we just to give you this idea, when we say that there's tumah in field A, so what would be a good example of this? There was a grave there. There was a grave in field A, right? So again, it's not the whole field is tameh, that there's tumah in the field. So suffix number one is, did I enter into field A? And even if I entered into field A, did I come in contact with the tumah in field A or not? So svek sveka, double suffix. When you have a double suffix, tar, the chachamim say that you're tameh. Now listen, what's the logic over this? The logic over here is, chacham says it's not a svek sveka. There's one suffix. It's all the same suffix. The suffix is, did you come in contact with the tumah or not? This happens to be not our top. We're not getting into this today. There is a fundamental machlokes about how svek sveka works. Does svek sveka, is a double suffix only created when you have two independent svekos? Or no, even it's the same suffix. So Chacham say it's one suffix. It's the same suffix. Did you come in contact with the tumah in field A or not? So as Rabbi Lazar is breaking this up into two svekos. Right? Suffix number one, did I enter into field A? Suffix number two, even if I entered into field A, did I come in contact with the tumah? The Chum saying it's the same suffix. Did you come in contact with the tumah in field A or not? So therefore, again, according to the Chachamim, it's a suffix tumah bershus hayachid. And what's halacha by suffix tumah bershus hayachid? Doubtful tumah in the private domain. The halacha is tameh. Tameh shahayir Rabbi Lazar Omer suffix bia tar suffix maga tumah tameh. Because Rabbi Lazar used to say, if there's a suffix, whether or not you came in contact with tumah, ultimately, again, the suffix is going to be tar. But if there is a suffix, whether or not you went ahead and you entered into you had contact with tumah, that suffix, maga, that's contact, that type of suffix ultimately, again, is tameh. Now, both say, so remember again, why are we here? Right? Why are we in tumah and tarah? So remember again, just to backtrack our steps a little bit. So remember again, we had a statement, right? We had a statement of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan said, again, that the Meitzar and the Chatzav ultimately create separate domains for Nechse Hager, but not for Peah and Tumah, right? That again, if you have boundary markers or this Chatzav plant, so when it comes to acquiring Hefker property, so the presence of those items creates two separate domains. Therefore, again, making a chazak on one field does not automatically give you possession over the second, right? But that's not true for Peah and Tumah. These items do not create separate domains for Peah and Tumah. Then again, Rabin came along in the Rabbi Yochanan and says, no. The same way that boundary markers and chatzav plants create two different domains for Nechse Hager, for acquiring ownerless property, they also create two different domains for what? For Peah and for Tumah. So now I understand. For Peah, if you have Chatzav plant running down a field, it's going to obligate you in two different corners for tzedakah, two different Peahs, right? And also again for Tumah, it's going to create two different fields, so that if one of those fields had Tumah, you're not sure which field you went into. Machlokes, Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim about whether or not that you're Tameh. That's all that's going on over here. Now the Gemara throws in one more wrinkle to this, which is Aval Shabbos lo. So let's at least begin this. Let's begin this today. They'll say, but the presence of chatzav plants or boundary markers does not create two different domains for Shabbos. Now, what is this? Here we go. Rava says, Afil in Shabbos. Rava says, not true. Chatzav plants and boundary markers create two different domains, even even for Shabbos as well. Now, what's going on over here? Desanya, both say it's a very interesting case. Hotzi chatzi gro geres l'rishus harabim v'yedicha v'chazer v'hotzi chatzi gro geres acharis behela. Okay, let's talk about this outside for just a moment. Both say one of the Lamites Malachos, one of the 39 prohibited categories of labor on Shabbos is hotzah, meaning you cannot carry something from one domain to another domain on Shabbos, which means can't carry something from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, private domain to public domain, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, public domain to private domain, and you also can't carry something Dalit Amis in Rosh Hashanah, 4 Amis in Rosh Hashanah itself. Okay, like every other malacha, there's a shear. Shear means again, you have to go at this. There's a certain quote unquote amount you have to. So, for example, by writing, you're not allowed to write on Shabbos, but you only transgress the malacha d'oraisa if what? If you write 2 letters. So for hotzah, for carrying on Shabbos, you're only chayiv for carrying if you carry the amount of a grogeres, a dried fig. If you carry the volume of a dried fig, you will be chayiv. Less than that amount, you're not chayiv. So look, this is an interesting case. The Brisa says as follows: I carry a half a grogeres. So I'm standing in my domain. Okay, I'm not me. Reuven is standing in his domain on Shabbos. What does he do? He carries a half a fig's volume out from the private domain to the public domain. Okay, and then he puts it down in the public domain. Then he goes back to the and then he goes and grabs another half a fig's volume and carries that out to the public domain. So this is what he does on Shabbos. Shabbos says, so he did 2 acts, right? 2 acts, each one by itself only a half of a fig volume, but combined a fig volume. Says he chayiv. So Gemara says it depends. Behelam echad chayiv. If he did all of this in one lapse of awareness, so we'll say we're assuming that this is a shogeg case. He forgot that it's Shabbos. So if he did all of this in one lapse of awareness, then ultimately again the actions will combine, and therefore he will be chayiv for accidental Shabbos violation. However, again, b'shnei ha'alamos pater. Ultimately, again, if he did this in 2 lapses of awareness, in other words, we'll say, if he went ahead and what? If he went ahead and carried out the first half volume, right, forgetting that it's Shabbos, then afterwards, after he did it, he's like, oh, Shabbos. And then he forgot again, and he carried out the second half. So therefore, I will say the 2 acts do not combine, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, he will be pater. Rabbi Yossi says, Behelam echad, top of nun vav, bershus achas chayiv, B'shtei rishuyos pater. So what Rabbi Yossi says, and again, we're going to stop, we're going to actually leave off on this over here. Rabbi Yossi says, even if he did it in one lapse of awareness, if he did it into one rishus, ultimately again, then the actions combine. If it's 2 rishuyos, if it's 2 different domains, ultimately again is going to be pater. We'll say, so we'll stop over here for today. We're going to pick up with this tomorrow. So again, Shabbos says, so just to understand what's happening over here, the Gemara want to introduce before this idea that the meitzah and the chatzav, the boundary markers and the chatzav plant create 2 distinct domains. Shabbos says, so now we know that those 2, that works in the following areas. Number 1, by nechse ager, so it creates different domains when acquiring ownerless property. According to some, it also creates 2 different domains for peyah as well as for tumah. But it seems to be that it does not create 2 distinct domains when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos. The clarity and the conclusion on that particular topic in Meretz Hashem tomorrow. Wow. What a Monday. We'll say, all right, shkayach, everyone.